fund a package to reward and recognise the NHS workers and give them a pay rise rather than getting people to stand on the doorsteps.
Plus, Simon, let's just get this right as well. Through the taxation system, both football clubs and in particular the football players, many of whom pay the highest rate of tax that they're legally allowed to do, football has done its part as far as funding the NHS, and like everyone else in society, Danny, we pay our taxes, and that's what it's for.
If you've got a £10 million a month wage bill as an employer, you then pay on top of that a 13% levy, which is the employer's national insurance contribution. So for every 10 million that a football club is paying on wages, is paying the tax for the players, their national insurance, and then the employer's national insurance, which is another 13%. So on every 10 million, the football clubs are paying 1.3 million a month if you're the average football club in the Premier League for national insurance. So they're actually on a furlough, merely taking their own money back to some extent. But that's not where we want this to be. Where we want it to be,
there's a moral issue to that. Yeah,
there's a moral issue to that. If the Premier League, it can't be if, when they get their pay cuts through, if they have the audacity to furlough staff, then I'll have something to say to the contrary of what I'm saying now.
So, as you say, we were actually discussing the temperature of the room, and I think you were halfway through saying that the problem is that the issues itself have changed. But let me ask you about that, Simon. And this is a genuinely question with no side. When I see even Burnley Football Club, they don't have billionaire owners saying that they're going to run out of money. It still makes me wonder what's going on in those businesses, because rainy days do happen. But full houses don't always appear.
But Dan, your cash flow is shot at this time in the season. Your cash flow is shot. What doesn't reduce is your player salaries. They don't reduce. You get a dreadful time of the year, which is the beginning of the season, when you get a great big lump of money from the Premier League, but you also get all the sign-ons and all the bonuses coming into the players. At the end of the year, you get no income. Then what you do is you plug up the gap. You go, okay, I've got another season coming, so I can then go and sell 20 million or 15 million worth of season tickets, so that'll go somewhere. Then I get my 40 million quid in August from the Premier League, so then I've got 55 million quid, so now I'm good for the next 6 months. And the reality of football clubs, despite the perception, because we're all guilty of it, billionaires own football clubs, and football players drive Ferraris, and people hear about £200,000 a week salaries. But that's for the players. The clubs themselves, if 75p in every pound that you generate is going to a wage, then you're in a very skewed industry. And if you look at the profits, Danny, you look at Everton lost £111 million on their last accounts. You know, you look across the board, Arsenal lost £27 million. Burnley made 36 million on their last accounts. But you look at those dynamics and say, at times of the year, it's not necessarily about profitability, it's about cash flow. And if your cash flow has gone, then you've got £9 million a month going out, and your cash reserves, the average cash reserves of a Premier League club is 25 million quid. That's the average. Spurs have got some more, Liverpool have got some more, Man United have got some more. Brighton, on their last accounts, had 686,000 worth of cash. Now, that doesn't mean Brighton are going to go bust. It just means that at certain times, the cash reserves are not very high and they rely on their income.
Right,
if
Simon,
they've got no income, Dan, how are they supposed to pay people?
Well, here's my next question for you. We've got about 4 minutes before we have to take a break. And thank you very much for the last 60 minutes. I don't know about the listeners. I found it scintillating radio, because we really have pressed on some of these questions. And I'm saying so, I know it's false modesty, but we have had a discussion. I don't think you're going to hear many other places. Simon, what about season tickets? Because we know that's a huge part of clubs' income, and or a large part of their income, or an important part of their income. Normally now they start banging the drum for season tickets for next season, but of course they won't be able to do that whatsoever there right now, will they?
Well, that's my point. But also, you're now looking at, if these games aren't completed, or, in my view, most likely go behind closed doors, every single football club is going to have a contingent liability to season ticket holders that have bought season tickets for this season, and on a prorated basis with 5 games to go, will have an amount due to them. Tottenham have got season tickets due, I think about 15-16 million quid. Apparently, according to Daniel, he's going to refund that to the fans if the games aren't played. But by definition, lots of clubs outside the Premier League won't want to refund that. Won't want to refund that because they'll want the fans to say, this is our club, we stand together. If it were me, if I owned Palace now and we were, say, outside of the Premier League, I'd be going to the fans saying, I've got 5 games left. It works out at £20 a game as an average. It's £100 I owe you. How about I give you £100 in the club shop or £100 in the bars? That would probably cost me £20. They'd get £100 of a perceived value, and I'd limit my exposure. But the reality is, Danny, is that there is exposure to these clubs, and people are always saying get ahead of the curve. We're living in a world now where getting ahead of this curve is the most important thing in the health front. Why shouldn't football clubs be getting ahead of the curve now, saying if this doesn't fix itself, if we don't get ourselves together, if this bites deep? And another thing, Dan, if the longer this goes on, the more social distancing becomes part of the psyche of this nation. Are we really under the impression that football stadiums are going to be full next year? That means the revenue for next year, if we are fortunate enough to get 19-20 done, and then we're fortunate enough to get 2021 back on the cards, I don't think football stadiums are going to be full. So all of a sudden, you've got revenue challenges this year, you've got season ticket challenges this year, you've got loss of revenue next year. No, don't worry about it. Billionaire football club owners should fund it.
Right, 2 minutes to go. 2 scenarios for you, please. Your plan, the plan for the Premier League and Championship players to take a pay cut to fund the overall body of football, or a scenario B that doesn't happen. How do you think football will look in a year's time? Scenario A, will all the clubs survive? Scenario B, will there be a terrible culling of football clubs?
Look, I think that the Premier League have advanced £125 million. The big headline yesterday was...
That's good.
Well, they haven't given it to them. It's an advance. The Premier League pay a solidarity payment, Danny, and that solidarity payment was enforced upon the clubs about 10 years ago on the basis of a gift which turned into something with a hook, which was give up your compensation rights on young players for the Elite Player Performance Programme. Now the clubs need it, so now that £130 million, it looks like a generous gesture, is money that was taken away from them in the first place by giving up their compensation rights, is merely being advanced. So what it does is it gives the clubs cash flow now and kicks the can down the road, and that can will eventually land at the end of the road, whether it's now or in 6 months' time or in a year's time. Now, of course, you keep pushing it down. Now, perhaps Peterborough can go and sell a player for £10 million and not have that problem. Perhaps Hartlepool or Crewe or Stevenage or someone else can do the same thing. But in the interests of prudence, the challenge is that there has to be a pay cut. And I just think that football, as a national sport that means so much to people, if the Premier League footballers and the Championship footballers don't do something with their salaries, I think there's going to be a real feeling about football that will lose some of people's perspective on it, and I don't think that's necessary. I think people can avoid it, and if football can survive naturally without having to have these pay cuts then deployed because something comes back on the radar and the world rights itself, then we go back into a circle. But what we do take away from it is the lessons that are learnt, that these sporting institutions are really, really fragile, despite the enormous amounts of cash swilling around them.
And that's because of the way they're run in terms of the revenue versus a payment to one group of their employees. Thank you very much indeed for that. Please hold on, George and Mo and the others who phoned in. We got carried away there. We're supposed to take calls. We'll take them straight away. But don't worry, Carl Walker. It'll just mean we're putting back talking about you by 15 or 30 minutes. Don't worry, Carl. You'll still get your day on Talk Sport. You're listening to Simon Jordan's Final Word with Simon and myself, Danny Kelly. Thank you for being along. If you've been there on for the last hour, you've heard something very different on the radio. And I thank you for being with us. We're back in a few seconds' time.